Okay, usually I say, and we're live, but now I don't even see it, but I'm gonna trust that we are live. Welcome to Fearless Flight Live, our weekly live show, and this is the crew edition. Captain Eric with me here today. Unfortunately, flight attendant Diane had some internet bandwidth issues, so she's with us in spirit. And if you are new to this show, the Fearless Flight live show is all about helping you manage and ideally overcome your fear of flying by recognizing that the pain in your brain is not about the plane. And of course, we have aviation news and a lot of other interesting topics here tonight. But I want to start out actually by, well, Captain Eric just came back from overseas not too long ago. And in our Birds of a Feather Facebook group, I found a post yesterday, and I'm gonna try and pull it up. Actually, I won't even bother. I'm just gonna read it to you. And it says, "Eek, I just booked a 2-week vacation to Italy, and equal parts are excited and terrified. I need a pep talk." And and it's a very, very, very natural thing, because from a psychological perspective, excitement and anxiety actually use the exact same neural pathways. So I joke often, anxiety is excitement without the breath. And if you have followed us for any length, you've probably come across our breathing techniques that we're sharing with fearful flyers and have worked extremely well. But in this case, I want to pass it over to you, Captain Eric, because you just traveled to Egypt, right?
Correct.
And how was it for you as a pilot, somebody that we as non-pilots would think, oh my God, you're cool as a cucumber, you got this all sewn up in a bag, so to speak. But it was actually bags that piqued your anxiety right off the bat, right?
Yes. So I went to the Red Sea and dove for a week, and also spent 3 days in Cairo, and hopefully we'll post some funny pictures later, and got a tour of the pyramids and the Egyptian Museum, which was fascinating. It was unbelievable. And then we went down to the Red Sea, and it's all I've been thinking about for a couple months, partly because of the excitement and partly because of the stressor of the moving parts and the fact that Egypt is way over there. And so I'm thinking about not being totally trustworthy of the airlines, not for reasons you guys aren't trustworthy, but thinking about the possibility of showing up without my stuff or misconnecting when I had to make the boat. So this is more of me empathizing with you than a pep talk, but I went over a day early and bought an extra hotel in the airport and had put Apple AirTags in my bags, which my smart brother suggested that I do. So I put the AirTags in the bags. I get over there, and sure enough, the bags are not with me when I get to Cairo. And my main concern is my dive gear that I need for the week. You can rent dive gear, and I prefer not to. It's life support equipment. You can rent underwear too, but I don't do that. So I've got this extra day of slack, and I'm very stressed on whether or not the dive gear is going to show up. And I see it coming that night on a later flight. And I go back over, talk to the security guys. They let me in the arrivals hall, and my bags show up. So I go back to the room and go to sleep. I'm like, oh, good. I have the dive gear. Day 2, I'm supposed to meet a guy from our dive shop. So I'm still jacked up by meeting a guy that I've never met before, seen his picture, and our Arabic driver to take us to a different hotel. So there's more moving parts, and I'm not going to give you the long version on the show. It'll take the whole time. You cannot make this stuff up. But the Arabic driver had gone in. The security guys just let them run willy-nilly through customs up to the gate and everything. And I saw this on my first day going, oh boy, he's going to pick up my partner way inside. So all I could do was wait in the arrivals hall, figured he would have a sign with my name on it, the other guy's name, coming out, and I would see him. Well, I'm watching hundreds of passengers come out of British Airways flight from London. I don't see any pair of guys, nobody with a sign, nobody kind of looking for me. 3 guys had hot-footed out to the van. As it turned out later, they got to the van when my person had landed from London. A flight had landed from Oman with a guy named Eric Larson on it. And he saw the Arabic driver holding up the sign that said Eric Larson. He goes, that's my driver. So he goes over, and the dive shop guy doesn't really know what I look like. He goes, well, I guess that's him. So the 3 of them go whipping out through the arrivals hall, and they're not looking for anybody. Past me, and I'm starting to tire after 45 minutes of watching arrivals passengers thinking about getting a cab to the hotel. But they get to the van, fortunately, and even though my buddy has come from Phoenix to Phoenix to London and Cairo, and has about 8% of battery power left in his brain, and the Arabic driver, they start talking to this guy, and they go, man, he doesn't sound like the guy the boss talked about at the dive shop. This guy, I was calling him Jason Bourne, because his picture looked like Matt Damon from the Jason Bourne series of facial hair. Well, Jason Bourne had been everywhere, and he didn't show, and he was there to dive for a week, but not with our group. And our Arabic driver keeps mentioning the name of our charter group, and Jason Bourne doesn't recognize this at all. So between the 2 of them, they figure out they got the wrong Eric Larson. So they come back in the arrivals hall, and the Arabic guy's screaming my name, and I jump up on the chair. Yes. And he's so nervous, his hand is shaking, and I have to grab his hand because he has a picture of the fake Eric Larson in his passport. He has a picture of the passport on his cell phone. That was day 2. Day 3, we show up over there, and everybody's showing their tickets and passports at security, which is at the outer doors. They have many layers. And they go, yeah, this ticket is no good. That's just a reservation. Well, it's a paid up receipt from a credit card with a confirmation number. They go, yeah, that's no good. So I had to buy another ticket right there for our trip from Cairo down to Hurghada, where we were staging to the marina to get on the boat. So every day I had a new stressor with these moving parts. And I was kind of until we got to the boat, I was like, oh, good. I'm on the boat. All I have to do is dive. So I was feeling a little bit of the pain that you guys feel, because each day was a new Roadrunner and Coyote show with me being the Coyote part every day. So,
wow. So
I felt your pain.
That stress, I could imagine, you could really feel that in your body, right? I mean,
yeah.
So that's where we're gonna tie into how this connects to that post, and I read a lot of these comments and are super supportive, and there's actually some really great tips and everything in there, but we cannot prepare for everything. So I cannot prepare you, Angie, for what's gonna happen in Italy on your vacation. But for sure, we can help you prepare yourself so that at the very least, your flight is not the biggest concern of your vacation. And me being from Austria, I've flown through Milan many times on the way over here to North America, and even Rome a couple times. They're actually super helpful in Italy. I will say that very, very the whole culture is very welcoming, and if you have any challenges, everyone is super quick to help. I will say that, having been there many times. But more importantly is, how do you actually prepare for your flight? And part of that is knowing your triggers before they fire. And then the next step, so that's step one. And step two is preparing yourself, depending on what your trigger is. It might be turbulence, it might be claustrophobia, it might be the fact that you're flying over water for a few hours. There could be a lot of triggers there, but usually it's one or two big ones. And we actually have our monthly webinar, which is on the third Thursday of the month. This month in July, it's going to be July 20th, where we going to talk exactly about that, knowing your triggers and how you prepare to meet those triggers. Because just like Captain Eric was sharing, there are going to be triggers that trigger your stress response, that trigger your anxiety, and that's natural. That is a human reaction, so to speak. All of us share that. How we meet that, though, and that's what we're going to be discussing in or on the webinar. So we're going to get to that a little bit later. And if you happen to watch, Angie, or if any one of you is going on a trip in the near future, summer holidays or whatever it may be, and you know your trigger, just put it in the chat on our Facebook page, and we could address it in more detail on a much more specific case basis rather than just talk in generalities. But here's the poll question for tonight. And let me ask you this. I'm gonna, just because I have to bring up the presentation, why don't you talk a little bit about the flights themselves, Eric? So where did you fly out of, and what were your connections, and what was it like on an international flight and airlines compared to flying, domestically?
Well, it was that was really fun, and it was exciting. And as we said before, watching an airline pilot pay for a ticket is a terrible thing. And so I procrastinated, and I wanted to buy a business class if I could. I've never flown business in my life. And I thought, gee, with all the length of travel, it would be exciting to do that. So I looked around for different hubs and different airlines, and I ended up buying a ticket in and out of Washington Dulles Airport ticketed by Lufthansa. And since it was ticketed by the foreign carrier instead of the domestic carriers, it was about a third of what I would have paid buying directly from the U.S. domestic airlines, and even with my employee discount. So I felt quite clever and very smug having scored that. All I had to do was non-rev there, fly standby there, fly standby back, and that worked out fine. That's always scary, but it worked out fine. And I did an extra overnight on each leg, and I can't tell you this guy's name, but one of our fearful flyers, his initials are Don Calvert, hosted me outbound and coming back, and we went out to dinner and talked and just had a great night before I rode the train out to the airport and got on. And the business class flight over was stunning. And I flew from Washington to Frankfurt, and then from there into Cairo, and reversing it, I flew from Cairo to Munich, and then picked up a United flight for the last leg back to Dulles as part of that ticket with a lie flat business class thing. And it was smooth and really relaxing and really exciting. And by being able to move my dates around and not having to buy a ticket out of my hub city, being able to move my departure cities, it worked out really well. So that part was fun and exciting, and I hope I get to do that again. And Angie, I guess I'll say this, like when I used to prepare for a check ride, I'd get jacked through the roof, and I'd get there and be ice cold, and everything worked out fine all the time, but nobody wanted to be around me a month prior to those. And the easiest way to do that is just think about a piece at a time. And for your trip, one day, what am I going to do on departure day? And then what am I going to do when I get over there? And then the next day, don't think, oh geez, this whole 2-week trip, getting a whole ball of wax, thinking about the whole thing all at once. Just take it into pieces and how you're going to handle each piece. For me, that was always much more helpful. I don't know if Dieter would suggest that, but
Yeah.
one time, don't try to digest the whole thing.
Yeah, and we actually had a webinar. I think it was actually not the last one, the previous to that, where we constructed our own Fearless Flight log, which means breaking down the flight itself into smaller segments, like, when you get to the ticket counter, when you go through security, when you are waiting at the gate, when they announce boarding, and then being in, in a mass of people. Because when you flew over from Washington to London, what plane were you on? What was it?
That was so fun. That was a 747. I haven't been on one of those for decades.
A 747? Oh my God, it's been forever since I've been on one.
Lufthansa's still flying. I'm like, oh, this is so cool. So that was pretty special.
Wow, so that's a treat.
Yeah.
So that breaking it down, to my experiences in some of those, international flights, you tend to, on the bigger airports anyways, wait a significant amount of time, either at the gate or taxiing, waiting until, it's your turn to take off. And that can take 20, 30 minutes. That is definitely worth a segment. And then you have your takeoff and climb out. And then depending on how long your flight is, you just break it down into 20-minute segments. And then you have your approach and your landing, and then you're there. So that's one of the things that we recommend. And we can help you with constructing that flight plan for yourself. So that would be my suggestion, to already do that a good week before, at least, if that really kind of like rattles your cage, so to speak. Really bring that down. And also remember, you can always book a 15-minute coaching call with Capt Ron, for example, to go through some of your, segments. That's my suggestion to you. And you did actually, the hardest part probably was sharing it in the group, being vulnerable, having the courage to, let people know. And from what I read, it was just really, really great support there. So let me pull up the poll question here. Can you, Eric, do you see it?
Yes, it's in great big letters. I can even read that.
Oh, excellent. So our poll question tonight is, does a pilot getting incapacitated during your flight, does that worry you? Yes, no, and why? Why or why not? And we're gonna segue here in a little bit, but if you want to put your answer into the chat, let us know. And I'm gonna try to see if I can advance, because we're gonna go and talk about an incident that happened just last week, right? Eric,
Yes.
I'm gonna let you take it away here.
So the reason we're talking about this is part of our current event stuff. And there's two of these specific events that got reported last week. And on the 24th, one of them occurred, the 23rd or 4th, there was an Air Canada Airbus A220, and it didn't say from where it was departing or arriving, but the first officer became incapacitated and unable to perform his duties. And I don't know if he was passed out, unconscious, what the details were, but incapacitated. is incapacitated. And there was a company deadheading pilot, a pilot riding either home or to work in the back. And the flight attendants were aware of this. And I hate speaking for Flight Attendant Diane. She was going to be able to help a lot with this. The flight attendants are aware that they're there and where they are. And so they were able to get the first officer out of the flight deck, into a seat and get some medical assistance for him. We'll get to that part in a minute. And the company pilot jumped in the first officer's seat and assumed his duties as directed by the captain. But when this stuff is reported, it is always presented as, oh gee, thank goodness there was a spare pilot in the airplane. He jumped in and landed the airplane. Or he jumped in and saved the day. What would have happened without the spare pilot? Well, if the spare pilot hadn't been there, the other pilot is fully qualified on the airplane and would have been able to land the airplane, either divert or destination without any problem. However, if there's a spare pilot, they can greatly relieve the duties of the other pilot, who is then the flying pilot, the PF, the pilot flying. He can help them with the radio work. He can help them with checklists. He can do whatever the other pilot directs. And generally these reporting will say the pilot came out of the back and took over and landed the airplane. That's highly unlikely. It's highly unlikely he flew the airplane at all, because the remaining pilot is now the commander of the airplane. So the spare pilot is only going to do what the other pilot tells him to, number one. But it is of great value and assistance. And the second thing they want to do is get medical attention to their crew member who has fallen ill. So the flight attendants, well, number one, when there's a company pilot on board, they know where he's sitting, they know who they are, they're able to identify them, look at their ID, determine it's real, and set up the transfer to get that pilot in the flight deck and the injured pilot out, the incapacitated pilot out. So the flight attendants are greatly helpful with that. And then the flight attendants are seeking medical professionals in the back of the airplane to have a look at the incapacitated guy. And the pilots in front may be talking to the contract medical services on the ground, whoever the airline uses, saying, hey, we have one of the crew members and this is the symptoms X, Y, Z. What should we do? And be relaying this information back to the flight attendants and the MD or whoever is on staff back there to assist the incapacitated guy to say, can we continue on? Is he stable, or do we need to be on the ground like right now to get medical assistance? So their communication is going on back and forth between the flight deck and the flight attendants very rapidly, and anybody assisting the incapacitated pilot, because you want to care for that crew member. But up front, the remaining pilot is flying the airplane just fine. And he has this person to assist them with the communication. It was also reported last week there was a Southwest incident in March. It was the same thing, only it was the other crew member, was the captain, who was a young buck, who's like 47, had some kind of gastrointestinal distress, but was incapacitated. They were taken off out of Las Vegas, going to Columbus, and there was another company pilot on board, and the captain came out. The other company pilot came back in. And they sought medical help in the back of the airplane, which happened to be present. And the other pilot helped with the radios, like I said, and the airplane turned around, went back to Las Vegas, got on the ground very quickly, and fortunately the guy was okay. But it's not essential, a save the day thing, to have the spare pilot get in the seat, but it is very helpful for working checklists, flying the airplane, and the communications that are going to exist that are not really standard, because you're maybe going to turn around, maybe declare an emergency, maybe deviate, and you have this extra communication going on between medical agencies on the ground and the flight attendant. So it's very helpful to have that guy there, but it's not a, oh my God situation. If they hadn't have been there, what would have happened then? It would have been fine. Oh, Dieter, you're muted. You're muted. I see your mute symbol. Do you hear me?
I do. Sorry. I just couldn't. I think my biggest takeaway from both of these is simply this. Somebody actually has thought about this long and hard. And so there are procedures and policies in place that you guys are training for. And then, if somebody actually is in the back, and that happens a lot, right? Because what I tell me about this. Why is it called deadheading? That doesn't sound, especially to fearful flyers, that doesn't sound like a good thing. And as far as I understand it, deadheading is when you are flying, let's say, from Washington, D.C. to Florida, somewhere, Orlando, but you actually are, living in Charlotte, then you got to get back home, and that flight home, which you are just sitting in the back, just like us passengers, that's called deadheading, right?
Yes.
And why is it called deadheading?
I think maybe Orville and Wilbur invented the term. It's just been there forever and nobody questioned it. It means a crew member in the back not assuming any duties.
Okay.
And they're there because the airline has a disruption and they're moving a crew member to another base to fly, or because they finished a trip. They finish or starting a trip and they don't live in base and they're riding home. They're commuting of their own volition, in other words. Mm-hmm. So the company's moving them or they're moving themselves. And anymore in a standard narrow body airplane, I bet the average is something like 2.5 to 5 people
per flight
that are per flight that are in seats commuting, riding home, deadheading, whatever, and often in the jump seat. If all the seats are full in the back, they're in the cockpit jump seat, or if they're a flight attendant, they, depending on the airline, they can sit in the flight attendant's spare jump seat if they're a qualified flight attendant. So, so there are far more often than not, spare crew members that are on the airplane
that are capable and able to help. I just want to acknowledge Roxana. Hi, Roxana, and thanks so much for sharing, because she mentioned that her flight was canceled, and that added to her anxiety. And I guess it was a software problem. United Airlines had a software problem, update problem. And and she said, well, I did not prepare for this. Well, these are some of these, we cannot, but I'm sure one of the things that I do is, what am I doing if my flight is delayed? Like, honestly, there's nothing to do with even fear of flying, but if I have to, stay longer in an airport or something like that, if my flight's delayed, for me personally, feel better if I, if I know, okay, well, I got an hour more to do this or that. And so if you already know that can be a trigger, your flight's being delayed, and it could be a thunderstorm at a destination airport, it's blue sky here, and you don't even know why the plane's delayed, right? Because there's no thunderstorm here. These things can really kind of play on our mind, and you just want to give yourself that, that space where, well, if I have another hour, another 2 hours, if my flight's canceled, here's my plan B, or here's what I could be doing. Again, it's just, instead of thinking worst case scenarios, you are now actively using those same pathways, but rather than being the victim of your biology, you are directing your biology back down, right? From that initial, like, oh my God, what's going on, to, okay, no big deal. I thought about that. I brought my book, I've got to read 5 more chapters, or whatever it may be for you, but at least you can establish your course of action as much as you can. Okay. So and I also want to acknowledge Melissa said, wow, I'm worried about flying into, hold on, where's that comment? Okay, into Poland. So not speaking the language, so that's a challenge. And I can tell you what I did when my wife and I, fly to places where, like one of the places, Thailand. I knew that I'm not going to have an easy time communicating. So I actually, on my phone, downloaded the Google Translator app and what do you call it? Like the file, rather than relying on the internet, I actually downloaded it at home ahead of time. So if anything happens, I can communicate with somebody because I'm prepared for that part. And I mean, maybe funny communicating through the phone, but at least you're gonna be able to make yourself, be understood good enough. So that's that. And then so the last thing we have on for tonight, let me just
Peter, do they speak a lot of English in Poland? I don't know.
I'm gonna say this. Poland is part of the EU. It's like all European countries, you learn English, probably starting, well, I don't even know. In Austria now, kids start learning English in kindergarten. So I can't speak for Poland, but most of Europe, you can definitely look for younger people, and then you have no problem, speaking English with them. And when I was in Poland, when I was back teenager and gymnast, nobody spoke any English because, at that point it was still behind the Iron Curtain. Right. So all they spoke was Polish and Russian.
Right.
Yeah. Now this obviously has changed a lot in the last 25 years, but if you do know you're going into a country that where language could be a challenge, you have a phone. Google Translate is free. There are lots of other translating apps that you could use. It's all about just being prepared for the things that you can prepare for. Okay. Yeah, last thing I mentioned, hello, flight attendant Diane, you made it.
We'll see. I had to contact my internet provider and we had to reboot things, but don't hold your breath or anything.
Okay.
Well, we missed you.
Well, I missed you too, all of you. I missed everybody. I missed all of our people everywhere.
So maybe the one thing that I thought it would be really cool to get your perspective on, or as a flight attendant. So if something happens to a crew member, whether it's pilot, co-pilot, or even another flight attendant, when there is more than one on board, you guys are trained for that, right?
Oh yes, that's one of the many things that we do have in our little list of things that are very, very most important. We have procedures. Of course, you have to go down the mental list that we have about asking the passengers if there's anyone on board who's a crew member who might be able to assist, to identify themselves. And then if that happens, if we find someone who, oops, my cat's here. If we find someone, then we have to check with them with regard to their credentials. Sometimes we have, and you probably already talked about this, we probably have on every flight at least one maybe deadheading pilot. And sometimes we have individuals who are retired and those kinds of things that may not be in uniform. And so we can go that way to find someone who may be qualified to assist in the cabin. And that's certainly the first line of our inquiry always. And that very often there's someone there. We have also, if the one of the pilots has become incapacitated, as you probably talked about, because of illness or some other kind of medical emergency, then we do the same thing with asking our cabin passengers if there's anyone there who is medical personnel. We're not required by our company to verify their credentials, but certainly I've never had an instance where if we have had to request help, that someone has not come forward when they have come forward to identify themselves as an EMT, a firefighter, physician, nurse, those kinds of things. So I've never had to ask anyone what their qualifications are. They have always offered what their position and their experience is. And so we have that. Obviously, there's a procedure when either one of our pilots leaves the flight deck. I don't know if you've already talked about this, but there's a procedure that we have to follow specifically because I guess, Eric, the FAA requires that there never be only one individual in the flight deck. We always have to have two individuals in the flight deck now, for lots of reasons, having been in experience with difficult situations in the past. And so if that happens, very simply, one of the things we do as flight attendants, we turn off the light in the galley. So there's no light right there. We notify, we have the other flight attendant come forward. So both flight attendants are in the galley. The forward flight attendant contacts the flight deck personnel. And then at that point, there is an acknowledgement through the peephole of who is calling the flight deck. The individual pilot, first officer, comes out. The forward flight attendant goes in and immediately goes in and locks the flight deck door. And then the other flight attendant literally stands at the galley, between the galley and the first row of passengers, and sort of is the guard there as far as monitoring the cabin, really for individuals to ensure, so that they all know. In our aircraft, there's one for example, there's one lavatory, it's all in the back. And so the pilot or first officer has to go all the way back. So we do that. And at that point, when the individual comes forward, we reverse the process. And so the pilot contacts the flight deck. They make recognition of the individual, no one's under duress, and then there's a switch again. So that would be what would take place if one of the pilots experienced a health or medical emergency. There would be that same kind of transfer. So we could remove the individual, the pilot, from the flight deck, get him or her to a bit safer location where perhaps one of the medical personnel that we've located on the aircraft can come forward and address the issue. And then the other, either perhaps pilot or first officer, someone deadheading, could enter the flight deck and then assist in that situation. Or if not, then certainly one of the other flight attendants could go in. So it seems very involved, but you do it so often that it's just, you don't really think of it. You just do it automatically, which is sort of along the lines that we've talked about for a lot of these situations, is that we train and train and train so much that you just do it automatically, as far as you don't have to think it or plan it or go, gee, God, what do I do now? We don't have the time. We don't have the time.
And that's what I said to Captain Eric earlier too. The takeaway is, you guys practice this, you guys play different scenarios all the time.
Oh, yes.
So that if and when something does happen,
Right.
it really
It's
goes
automatic.
pretty seamless. Yeah. So I do want to acknowledge Jim. Jim, I think it's the only one that I saw anyways of all the comments across, said his answer to the poll question was no.
We have.
Sorry.
Oh, we had a poll question asking about pilot incapacitation.
Yes, and so most answers were yes, and I would have imagined that, but Jim said no, because there's another equally qualified pilot in the flight deck, and that is absolutely absolutely true. And he actually shared that his congressman is an MD and helped a passenger on a flight not too long ago. So, you know, people get sick, people have health challenges, all sorts of things. That happens more often than we think. And because there's a lot of people moving moving through the skies on any given day. And so, but if coming back to where we started, you know, this can be a trigger, right? This can really be a trigger for somebody. And I alluded to it earlier, and I'm gonna try and pull it up if I can, because we actually have a webinar coming up where we're gonna be talking about identifying and managing your triggers before they fire, right? And that's the key, because often when they do fire, depending on how, I'm going to use technical term, depending on how juicy they are for you, your biology might take over for a little bit, and that in and of itself can be really challenging. And so knowing our triggers is one thing, but then also knowing what works for you in that situation and practicing, just like Flight Attendant Diane said, practicing it before they actually fire. That's going to be the key to your success. And so I hope that's a webinar that really should speak to a lot of you, because, you know, essentially it is those triggers, whether it's turbulence, flying over water, claustrophobia, any of these things that make your experience not a very positive one, and we want to help you change that around for yourself. So as far as I'm concerned, I think we've gotten through all of our stuff. I do want to mention one little thing. Or Diane, do you have anything?
No, just that I apologize. My internet service has been a little iffy, more than a little iffy this evening, but we'll deal with it. And we'll
I'm glad we recovered you.
Yes.
To whatever degree,
But I will lob this in your court, Eric, because you've mentioned a while back on one of those shows that you actually, as a pilot, you were if worried is a word in that sense, but the most concerned you were actually with taxiing from the gate to to the landing strip. So I've seen this article about how Airbus is oh, look, there's my kitty. How Airbus is working on an AI kind of like assist in taxiing, and presumably because our airports have gotten so much busier, right? And so it's even more of a challenge, right?
Yeah. So even if you go to a place, obviously the more familiar you are, the better it is. But then you go to some places where no matter how familiar you are, you know that it's going to be just a beehive of activity. So you're not really stressed flying the airplane, but you're kind of stressed when you get on the ground. And they're not supposed to do it, but the tower controller, while you're reversing, you're decelerating and you have the thrust reversers honking and this huge amount of noise on the runway, they'll start telling you which exit to exit on, which you may or may not hear, but hopefully you do. They're just trying to smooth the flow. And then as soon as you exit and are stowing engine reversers and stuff like that and flip to ground, the ground controller will often just rip this clearance of several different deals where you've got to hold short, turn here, do this, go to the inner world, outer deal, go over here, contact the ramp guy over here, and all at once without drawing a breath. So you know he's going to do it. And even though you're both ready for it, it's terrifying. And it would be easy. And I got involved in very few snafus in 30 years by luck, but I knew that was going to happen every time I landed. While it had the thrust reversers screaming, and it would still unless I was in Phoenix or something like that, it would still terrify me knowing that the guy was going to rip a clearance to me and tell me where to exit while I have the thrust reversers going very loudly, but they just do it. So if Airbus can get this AI thing where the airplane can essentially copy the taxi clearance, it would be easy to do that for a techie like you. Have the airplane copy the taxi clearance, and then since the cockpits are all glass with those EVIS displays up now, you could, and we had it on our laptop, our taxi diagram with the chart. Well, I would think it'd be easy to make a chart transfer to the screen in front of you and display the taxi route as the clearance came in, just like it displayed the route while you're in the air. I would think that would be not much of a technological leap that would be hugely helpful to have the purple line weaving among the taxiways and show you what the clearance was you just received. And I think that's what they're talking about doing.
Okay.
With that Project Dragonfly.
And I think that'll help with because we talk a lot on the shows, in recent months, more of these near misses, or nothing actually happens, but I think it's partially because it gets so much, it's a lot busier, than it used to.
Yep.
And so if we can, I have not read or heard of a heads-up display in a commercial airplane yet, but I will say that I've seen a heads-up display, just like in some more of the luxury cars, where, like you said, where you literally have, they call it augmented reality, and so it's overlaid, and then it guides you along. So to me, that makes perfect sense. It's just a matter of feasibility, and then one airline is going to be the first, and then everybody else is probably going to follow.
Yeah.
So.
And if that would be a real big deal. That would be a real big safety enhancement deal. And not being really too computer literate, I'm guessing that would be not much of a leap to be able to do that. Have the airplane receive the clearance and display it. I think that's quite possible.
I think so too. Well, thank you both for especially you for your persistence, Diane. I love it.
I unplugged and replugged in everything I could plug in and unplug. So we'll see.
Well,
it worked. Got back.
Yeah. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. And next week's gonna be Captain Ron again, and I think he's also gonna talk a little bit more about the 201 course that he's been updating, and we have a few new videos in the Fearless Flyer Club as well. So that should be exciting. And I believe we'll probably have a guest coming on next week as well. So thank you, guys. Have a wonderful rest of your evening and great week. And we'll do this again next week.
We'll see you guys in 2 weeks, plus on the webinar.
2 weeks. That's right.
Bye.
All right. Good night, everybody.